Good morning. Today is February 8th, 2015. We're in Esther chapter 2. Esther becomes queen. So we've been talking about this empire, that's the Persian Empire, and the central area is Susa, which is shown on this map with a little tiny red font down in the central area, Sushan. That's the Susa would be the city right near there that we right on the Iraq-Iran border in the modern world. And our characters, Esther, is about to have her entire life changed. It's because of an event that happened last week. You can go back and look at it where the Queen Vashti, chose to defy the king. And to be blunt, the king is not happy. I'll be using some pictures this week from, if you were to Google Esther, you'll find a number of different things. This is from one of the movies that's been made about Esther. What's that, Sri? Sherry's asking how old the king would be. Would he be older than this? We don't know his age. This is in the 7th year of his reign, so he hasn't been king very long, and so this might be a good guess. But he could have been older. It's hard to tell for sure. Let's go ahead and jump into our text. So after these things, that was the events in chapter 1, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated. And by the way, I did have the text up there last week from the NIV version, which had King Xerxes. This is the same king. But this is the ESV version I flipped back to, and you'll see the name change. It is the same person. When he had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the capital, under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given. Let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so. So we're talking it back during the children's sermon and also kind of between there about this process. And I equated it something like, this is almost like a Miss Universe pageant or something. I say that because the overall empire is huge. And so to reach out to all 127 provinces that he is king over, and if they had contests inside of those individual 127 provinces to select the people that were sent, and then those, I don't know if it was 127, but some number of women then were sent then to be here, and then they go through a long process of selection before which one's going to actually be the new queen. It's a long and drawn out, I'll put this in quotes, beauty pageant, if you will. It's not just beauty, of course, the king is looking for, but other things as well. So it's interesting. Now, there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai. And Mordecai is going to be one of our major characters, so kind of follow along with him as we follow the story. The son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who was carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, who Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. So some of you might recall that we were preaching through the book of Isaiah, and the later section of Isaiah is about the Babylonian exile and those that would be carried away. Well, this is them. This is exactly the people. And there are some, as I mentioned before, who had returned to Jerusalem after the time of Nehemiah, and that was, of course, rebuilding the wall back there. But there are also some who stayed. You might ask yourself, why would they stay? Well, they set up lives, and they're used to living there, and so this is kind of no offense, Jerusalem wasn't so great either right now. Okay, so it's complex stuff. Why do people do what they do? Well, it's part of their lives. Verse 7, he was bringing up Hadashah, which is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, and she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So if you were to Google Esther, you'll find a number of different things. Today I'm using a number of photographs, stills that I found from this particular film. Not seen the film, don't know if it's any good or not, but this particular one is Esther, right? And this particular one, the quote was there I thought was nice. I may be poorly dressed, but I'm rich in faith. And this is their portrayal of how Esther might have looked, possible, during that time period. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in the custody of Haggai, Esther was also taken into the king's palace and put in the custody of Haggai, and who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. And they quickly provided her with cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. So this is interesting. So it's sort of like she's got a team, if you will. There's 7 young women who are there to serve Esther now. She's never had servants before, very likely at least. And so she now has this team, if you will, who's going to probably, this is just making this up, but to take care of her hair and take care of other things about her and to try and help her pick her clothes and do various things. And so it's sort of like, as I said, in this idea of a beauty pageant, there's sort of this whole team right there with, behind each of the contestants. And that's why I think it's an appropriate analogy as we go through this. Okay. So, he had provided her with her cosmetics. He provides her some things there and for a portion of food, which is interesting. Right. And then advanced her and her young women, that's her 7 that are working with her, to the best place in the harem. So they're kind of competing in the pack, if it will, here. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. So this is really interesting. As I was thinking about the takeaways for today, what do I want to say about that? Why would Mordecai not want her to make known that she was a Jew? Okay, let's think about that for a second. The Jews were a people that were taken into captivity. They're not necessarily regarded with the highest regard. They are a people set apart, and they are probably seen that way. So is there some value in not broadcasting it, making it known to everybody? Sure, in a sense. Maybe it's a negative. Maybe it's a possible negative. Maybe it's for her safety. Maybe something else. So this is interesting. Is that a choice for us? Do we, in times, select whether we do or don't project the fact that we are a Christian? Are there times, do you, and put your hands over the keyboard because I'm curious what you would say on this, do you always make it a point that everyone around you always knows that you're always a Christian? Do you always make it known, or do you select? Because I know sometimes every one of you, I've talked to each of you, I know each of you at times will certainly at times share things about your faith, but do you make it a point to make sure everybody always knows around you that you're always a Christian? Okay. Eileen says not always. Okay. Okay. Kim, not always. Same exact one. Okay. Sheree says I'm selective. Well, guess what? I'm the pastor and I am as well. Okay. So there are spots that you're to laugh, but I mean, I talk about when I'm off, kind of off duty, so to speak. Right. And Eileen says just tries to be a quiet example when I can. Yeah, so this is interesting. So if you were to walk up to my upstairs bedroom, go into the closet and look on my T-shirt rack, I have lots of T-shirts, and I wear different T-shirts, and I use it for better or for worse, for sort of making various types of statements. Some of them are kind of funny jokes, at least I think they're funny, various types of things. Some of them are causes that I think are important to me, like I've got a number of autism T-shirts, for example. I have a number of woodworking T-shirts. I have a whole bunch of fishing T-shirts, and I have a number of Christian shirts. Some of them are very subtle. Some of them are pretty aggressive. And I choose which shirt I'm going to wear depending upon the environment I'm going to be in. And there are some where I feel that putting it out there in a really aggressive manner may not be constructive to trying to further the gospel. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should always be as aggressive as possible. I don't think so personally. I don't feel led to do that, so I don't do that. Okay? Now, if somebody asks me, I never lie, and I certainly don't, and I wouldn't. I don't try to hide it in the sense that they would, if they were inquiring about it, I absolutely would share with somebody. But I don't always put it, if you will, in your face. And so I think that there is an interesting statement here. For better or for worse, Mordecai instructs Esther to keep it to herself. And there's a couple of phrases with this that come up that I think might be applicable here. This has to do with the kind of casting your pearls before swine. This is a phrase that's used in the gospel of throwing out the information for someone who's not necessarily going to use it in a productive manner. Sometimes putting a target on your back on the internet, for example, if you're on Facebook and having huge, I'm a Christian, come bash on me signs is not necessarily the most productive way to initiate a conversation. So this is interesting in that regard. But regardless, this is something that it's something to think about and pray about. And I encourage you to let God guide you as to how you do or don't talk about your faith and how exactly that goes out there. But I would encourage you to make a statement when you think it's appropriate and when God's leading you to do so. So there's the balance I'm trying to strike there. So I found this interesting. So this is kind of a picture for one of the movies. I thought was interesting. This is Mordecai, telling her, presumably, might be giving her some direction. And you see, of course, how she's dressed at this point, sort of as a simple dress, if you will. And he's giving her direction as to probably how to conduct herself as she leaves to go off to this particular selection process. Verse 11, and every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this is the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months of oil with myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. Boy, that's an interesting beauty process. It's a 12-month spa experience here, if you all follow my point. When the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in the custody of Xerxes, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. This is a single elimination contest, if you follow. You get one chance, and in that one chance, either you make an impression and get to go to the next round, or you don't. So single elimination tournament, for those of you that know that term. She would not go into the king in 15. Okay. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So this is interesting in that the Bible portrays Esther as someone thrust into this extraordinarily disorienting and different environment. I mean, she's never walked these halls. She's never worn these clothes. She's never been. You understand? I mean, this is a whole nother world. It's like she was picked up and dropped onto an alien planet. And yet, within this environment, she's trying to listen, and she's trying to learn, and she's trying to do what she can to try and be the best that she can be here. And so it's interesting because the Bible speaks favorably of her in these verses. That, for example, she listens to Hegai, and she's doing these things, and she's winning favor with all those that are around her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all of his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. And he also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. He's happy. He's getting married. So again, this is the one from the movie Esther. And the way that they've written it here is, my love for you is as great as my love for Persia, King Xerxes. This is played by Joel Smallbone. Now, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai, just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So my daughter Sarah was sitting beside me earlier and asked, well, why? Why would these two guards suddenly want to, hurt or even kill the king? And my answer is, well, first, the Bible doesn't tell us. And second, just the fact that he's king probably was enough. Okay, this is just one of those things that happens, of course, with intrigue, if you will, among royalty. Verse 22, and this came to the knowledge of Mordecai. We don't know how. Maybe they were discussing it at the gate. Maybe something else was happening. Maybe they were trying to enlist more people into their plot, and they were looking for volunteers, and they were not, shall we say, as discreet as they should have been in order to accomplish it. Whatever the case, it came to his knowledge somehow, and he was concerned, and so he goes and tells Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, The men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of Chronicles in the presence of the king. And that will be a very important point later in the book. Well, let's do a couple of quick takeaways, shall we? Number one, how and when we reveal our faith matters. Number one, how and when we reveal our faith matters. I'm not going to tell you how and when to reveal your faith. I think you should talk to the Holy Spirit about that, and you should decide what exactly it is that God wants you to do and how he wants you to portray it. I think it's important for you that you be ready and willing. Peter writes that we are to be ready both in season and out of season. And I think that that's a good phrase to be able to think about. We should be ready in season and out of season. By in season, there's some times you're going to walk into conversations. You know that they're coming. You know that you're going to have to talk about, or that you should be talking, maybe I'll say it that way, about spiritual things. But then there are times when you're just, I don't know, you're just there. So whatever, I'm saying, whatever it is. And from that, you need to be able to respond and be able to do it out of season. So how and when we reveal our faith matters, and I'd encourage you to talk to God about that. There's a place, I think, for everybody on the spectrum, everybody from the one who is extraordinarily quiet in their faith to literally that man standing on the corner with a bullhorn. Y'all follow? And most of us will fall somewhere in that spectrum between very, very quiet and literally shouting with a bullhorn, yelling out. And I have compassion for both ends of that spectrum and everybody in between, that we're all at different spots where hopefully that God can use us in different ways. Number two, if you let God use you, he will in ways that you cannot imagine. Number two, if you let God use you, he will in ways that you cannot imagine. So this is fascinating that, Esther, the day before the decree went out, was just living her life. You understand? I mean, this is the furthest thing from her mind, that the next day she will be picked up and taken off to this selection process, and that sometime about a year and change later, she would be queen. It's just not something that she would have ever imagined. And I share that with you because there have been times in my life, maybe not that dramatic, but there have been times in my life when I realized I'm in a spot that I could not have imagined. To be blunt, me being a pastor, I could not ever have imagined being a pastor for you guys. I could not imagine you ever want to show up on Sunday morning and hear me ramble about this stuff. So, as we go through and talk through this, I would encourage you to be open to how God can and will use you, and you might be surprised at what God will come up with and how it is that his plan is different from your plan. Number three, trust in God that he is in control, especially when you feel your life spinning out of control. There's a number of you today that are here, or some of you may be listening to this afterwards, and there's been a lot going on in your life, and you probably feel your life is, if you will, out of control. In that you had your life and you were just going along, busy making other plans, doing what you thought your life was all about, and the whole world rocked. The whole world tilted, and it all went a different way. It's actually easy to trust God, that God is in control, when in control means the way you want it to be. But when the world tilts hard to the left, and all of a sudden it's different and not what you thought it was going to be, that's actually the most important time to remember God is still in control of this. And God will use whatever happens to his glory if I will let him. And I would encourage you to let him. Which gets into the question of the week. Where do you need to trust God more this week? Where do you need to trust God more this week? If you're at a spot where your world has tilted, it is different than you imagined it possibly could be. If you are at a spot where things are different, for better or for worse, let me encourage you to trust God deeply, to reach out to him and to embrace him and to say, God, I know you are in control, and you can use this all, better, good and bad. You can use all of this for your glory if I just don't mess it up. Focus on what he wants you to do, and with all due respect, what he doesn't want you to do, because he's got this. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are in control. Lord, when our world tilts, when suddenly everything seems a kilter, when you speak to us in those times and we are, in a word, simply in chaos, Lord, I would simply ask that you would calm our hearts and calm our minds, still our spirits, and remind us once again, you've got this. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.